Guys, so in this video what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a trail arm position that makes bad shots just so much harder to do. Now this is something that I do with a lot of people that come through that door for golf lessons, but also with students that I work with online. See, the common problem for most amateur golfers is you struggle in the downswing. You struggle knowing how to turn your body and how to position your arm. So this drill is kind of quite simply put together to make sure that you're doing one thing at a time, but you're also understanding the importance of both what your body is trying to do and therefore what your trail arm is trying to do, and you put the two together and bad results will theoretically become a lot harder. First thing that we need to do is we need to learn how to control our low point, because most golfers who struggle with the trail arm, it's actually because you're struggling with your body. See, if you're the kind of golfer who stands up, well then it doesn't matter what you try and do with this arm, it's not going to be able to do what you want it to do. So objective number one is we have to learn how to turn while staying in posture. And what I mean by this, I'm talking about the downswing, so this part of the swing here. Okay, now what we need is we need a good amount of chest rotation, and we need to make sure that we're moving towards the target whilst equally shifting pressure on towards our lead side. Now if I turn correctly, right, so if I move my upper body correctly in the downswing, I should be able to get the club to strike the ground opposite my lead ankle line, if not even slightly further forward. Now if I'm somebody who has a tendency to sort of stand up or lean back, the club will come down too early and it will lift at that point in time. So the first thing that you want to practice, and like I say with students I get them doing, is just kind of do a couple little practice swings where you just practice keeping the club as low to the ground as possible, and this will give you the feeling of turning your upper body over your leg, and you need that. Okay, so you make a couple of practice swings where you just strike the ground opposite your lead ankle. See what I'm doing here? Now it doesn't matter at this moment in time if that feels like all you're doing is swinging over the top and too steep. It doesn't matter, truly does not matter. All I want you to do is just first of all practice hitting the ground opposite your lead ankle. Because if you can't do this move and you can't rotate your chest and your body downward, it doesn't move the shoulder. And what we need to do is we need to get this shoulder progressively moving down to the ground. If we can do that, then we're going to have freedom to play around with this arm to help us neutralize this swing. So when you're doing practice swings, and I say this with all my students, that's why I do a lot of practice plans now with students as well, because I try to be very clear in terms of why you're doing a drill. So when you're practicing this drill, it's not the idea that you're going to have this perfect swing. What I'm trying to say is when you're doing this, you are trying to make sure you get the feeling of turning your upper body down over your lead leg, still keeping the weight in that lead side as well, so that it helps you strike the ground opposite the lead foot. And if you can't strike the ground then you need to do it more. So it's amazing how many golfers I meet who go, yeah, okay, I get that, and then they still end up here. You'll be surprised how much you need this motion, like so. Okay, now once you can do that, like I said to you, that's a really good thing, because that's going to help us, like I say, control where the club is striking the ground, and that is by understanding this sort of linear / rotational movement. However, as I've already said, the likelihood is that that club is coming down a little bit too steep, and the divot might be too steep as well. So you can kind of see as I'm hitting the ground here, if that was grass, that's going to be a couple of inches into the floor. It's a bit too steep. But the way I stop doing that move or reduce it is not by doing like, you know, sort of standing up or anything like that. It's not. What's happening is when I'm doing that practice swing and I'm turning like so, can you see in my arms the club shaft is coming down too vertical? And this happens with golfers. When I encourage golfers to try and trigger more rotation, what generally happens is they'll come down too steep. So what we now need to do is we need to think about the arms. Now the thing that your arm is trying to do in the downswing is as my body turns down and around, what I don't want to do is I don't want the club shaft getting in this position. What I want to try and do is keep my forearm pointing up to the sky. See, if I sort of point my forearm up to the sky, can you see the way it just shallows the club? Like so. So that's my backswing as I start the downswing, like so. And that's kind of ultimately what we're after, because now I can go as much down and around as I want, and as long as I keep that trail forearm pointing up to the sky, it will shallow out the hip. And what I mean by that is, can you see this was before? Okay, and this is after. Can you hear the difference? So I'm still going down and around as much, but because my forearm is no longer this way and it's more pointing up to the sky, can you see the way it's now a very wispy sort of strike, which is ultimately what we are after. Now you can do this to any degree. As I've tried to talk about in recent videos on the channel, there are different ways to swing the club. But what you are trying to do, and what every amateur is trying to do, is you're trying to blend good rotational motion with a good trail arm move. And there's options there in terms of how you want to do it, but you need both of those things, because this type of motion, if I sort of bring it down, keep my forearm up to the sky as I keep turning, this is going to give me into this type of position here, where this arm structure is going to be a lot more sort of soft, as opposed to where most amateur golfers tend to find themselves, which is up here. Okay, so you do this sort of drill. The only thing that you want to build into your awareness with this drill as your sort of time goes on is just be mindful of the club face as well. So you start hitting the ground, excellent. Okay, you do that. You then start thinking of your forearm, but there'll be lots of you now that will think, well, if I drive my forearm, the club face gets open, and that's right. Okay, but we know that with professional golfers. You only have to look at professional golfers as they come into the late downswing. The hands are ahead of the club head. Sorry, the hands are ahead of the ball at this stage, and the hands are ahead of the club head like so. And then from here, it's a little arm rotation that squares the face. And that's what happens with pros, okay? This is that kind of hitting zone that we really want. It's kind of known as that late hit. This is what ultimately we're after. So they get good body rotation, they get good functionality here to help them bring the club down on plane, and as they come into this bottom part of this swing, that's when they really concentrate on rolling those arms to square that face and then swinging through. And that's exactly what you guys need to be doing as well. Now, my last little point, okay, my last little tip, and I'm doing this quite a lot with golfers at the moment, particularly I'm doing this with golfers that I personally feel have never experienced compression. Now, compression is basically delivering the handle ahead of the ball, like so. Now, the reason why golfers struggle with this is because they get too tilted. They get too tilted in the setup and they move off the ball to a point where it's unrecoverable. So what I'm doing with those golfers is I'm changing their posture and their setup. And what I'm saying to them is, right, you imagine one of two things. You imagine just to the left of me here, I'm standing on a really tall building, and instead of trying to lean away from it, I just want to feel like I can peer over the edge. Okay, so that kind of moves me a bit more down into my lead side to start off with. We know pros do that. I do that. I know pros that do that from the data. They start with more weight on the left, but they don't shift the weight onto the left like this. They get a bit more down into the leg. So don't be afraid of getting a bit more, get that belt buckle down towards your lead ankle in that setup position, just to favour that lead side. And a good indication is if I was to draw a line vertically through my lead ankle, see my shoulders on that line, not too tilted back here. So you can start a little bit like this, favouring that lead side. In the backswing, you're still going to shift the weight towards the trail side. That's absolutely key. But then from here, you see, as I come back into that downswing, I can just re-establish that feeling of going down and around my body, keeping the forearm pointing up to the sky. And that's going to give me this right arm position and that right arm location, which is just going to give me those great results. And you can do this. So if that's my setup, go a little bit more down and around, and then see, my trail arm is in this nice location, which is going to make bad shots just so much harder. So if you are somebody who has a tendency to stand up and you know that you end up straightening this arm too soon, then this video is really made for you. But also bear in mind, when you're practicing this, give yourself time. Practice concentrating on your low point with your body move first, and then once you become established at that, start thinking about what your trail arm is doing. And if you can get the blend of both of those, well, you're truly going to have the ability to get good ball striking and control where it's actually starting, which, to be honest, is what most golfers struggle with. It'll help, I promise. See you soon.